Hey, this is Haplin, and in this module, we're going to talk about pipeline organization. Now, rest assured, this will include more workflow actions, but for now, we're actually going to leave workflows. Make sure you save whatever it is you've built so far and head over to the Opportunities tab. Let's start by building our first opportunities pipeline just to kind of get you situated to what's going on right now. We're going to have stages where leads will follow a sales process. So map out your sales process in your head. I'm going to use a typical and very classic pipeline framework. It applies to a lot of different industries and it's very simple. This will just be my example. It's got 3 stages. First stage is going to be new lead. Second stage is going to be what I call a hot lead, or a lead that just responded very recently. And then the last stage will be appointment booked. And obviously then there's conversion after that based on appointment. We won't get into that right now, but let's just focus on those 3 stages. New lead, hot lead, and appointment booked. Once I have those stages set up, I'm going to click save. And now in my opportunities view, I can see those stages. So it's a nice little visual map of where my leads are, where they're headed, where they might be getting stuck, etc. Now back in our automations, I can add the action create or update opportunity. We'll do a couple cool things with opportunities here really quick. The first will just be simply adding the lead in the new lead stage. When somebody becomes a lead, we've talked about the triggers being basically the form that they filled out in order to give you their contact information. Absolutely mandatory that we create an opportunity for them. So every time we get a new lead, we add a new opportunity to that first stage in the sales pipeline. Sound simple enough? All we have to do is designate the pipeline and the stage, as well as give the opportunity a name. If we leave this blank, it'll always just use the contact name. So I tend to leave this blank. Opportunity source, you can dial in the source that they came from. Lead value, if you have an average value of a new sale, you can put that in for the lead value in dollars or whatever denomination you're using based on where you're operating. And then for the status, let's just say open. This is an open opportunity. We have not won or lost them quite yet. Once we click save, we'll be good. Now we know that every time we get a new lead, they're going to be added to the pipeline. Now, once you have a lead in a stage in a pipeline, the UI is built so that you can click and drag that lead anywhere. Manual organization is totally up to you, but let's have a little bit more fun with automation. I mentioned that the second stage in the pipeline is going to be the hot lead stage, or the stage where somebody responded. So let's set up automation so that when a lead responds, they will be put into that stage. They'll move stages. So remember in last module how we used an if-else to discern whether or not the lead had responded to our first SMS. We will piggyback off that same idea to have the lead move. So on the if-else path where they did respond, if they did respond, we'll add an action to create or update the opportunity. This action is called create update because if there isn't one, it creates one. But if there already is one, then it will just update it. The only way to override that is to allow duplicates, which is pretty uncommon. So I recommend keeping that unchecked, but just know that if there is already an opportunity, it will just move the existing one. So now when they respond yes, or when they respond at all to our first message, we can have the system automatically move them into the hot leads bucket. Now, just as a little bit of extra credit, let's learn about one other action. Let's say you've got more than 2 days worth of follow-up, like we were talking about in the last module. You follow up now, the next day at 10:30 a.m., and then the next day after that at 11. Do you have to keep doing all the waits and the if-elses? And then now you also have to do the create opportunity. Well, you have to build some of it out, but we're going to learn about one action that makes things a little bit easier called go to. So let's say we copied all of those actions into another iteration. So now we've got another day's worth of follow-up and a second if else. Rather than rebuilding out the create or update opportunity, we can simply use the go to action to send them back up to that initial path where they responded to move them to the hot lead stage. So now it doesn't matter which message they respond to. If they respond to either of those messages, the workflow will automatically route them over to that opportunity stage. So now we know how to create an opportunity and how to move an opportunity based on particular actions or their lead experience, etc. But there's one other thing that we should be paying attention to when we're building these sales pipelines, and that is keeping them from getting too cluttered. Probably the number one biggest mistake that I see with these sales pipelines in high level or in any system really is just that they get a little bloated. They get overloaded once you have more than 100 leads. Not only can it make page load speed go a little bit slower, so you don't want to overwhelm the page with data or else it's just harder to click buttons, but it's also just becomes less useful when you have just so many different contacts in there that all of a sudden in your hot lead category there's 500 leads. How is that meaningful? How is that actionable for a sales rep? Usually there's just a couple leads in there. They're the freshest, the ones who responded most recently, and that is kind of where you start when you're doing any kind of manual follow-up or when you're reviewing your current pipeline. So for these hot leads, I really only want them to be called hot if they're within the last 3 days. So if they get to 3 days and no other action is taken, or they haven't responded again, or they haven't kept up with it, then I'm just going to move them back to the new lead stage. Or actually, better yet, maybe I just want to abandon them altogether. We can do whatever we want. I'll show you both ways. For this, we're actually going to build a second workflow because we're going to learn about another trigger. That trigger is stale opportunities. So once I've added the stale opportunities trigger, I'm going to add a couple filters. First, I'm going to designate the pipeline. Then I am going to designate the pipeline stage. So I want to make sure this is my sales pipeline, that this only applies to the hot lead stage. And then I'm going to specify duration in days. There's a couple other filters that are just kind of helping you zero in on the right lead. But in this case, I just want anybody who has been stale for a certain number of days to get kicked. So I'm going to set the filter to 3 days and then save the trigger. And for my first and only action in this workflow, I'm going to set it again to create or update opportunity. And now I can do whatever I want. I mentioned moving it back to the new lead stage. I mentioned abandoning the opportunity. We could do both at once. The point is, another workflow has kicked off based on this trigger, which is that the lead sat in that hot lead stage and nothing happened for 3 days. So if I'm in a sales situation where I wanted to say, hey, if they don't respond within 3 days, we just give up on them, that might be poor sales strategy, but technically possible, makes for a fine example, because we can have this stale trigger just set all the opportunities to either lost or abandoned after they've staled out for 3 days. And this is really, really nice or helpful because it allows us to keep our pipeline really clean. Now we'll never have a situation where the pipeline is filled with 500 names from years and years ago. Every time a lead sits there for 3 days, it's going to be organized. And even if that moves to a long-term follow-up or another stage or whatever, especially with a hot lead stage, if you want your sales rep to kind of be in the flow and in the know of who their most important leads are that day in terms of the most recent conversations or whatever, you typically don't want a single rep looking at more than maybe 10 names, or after 10 it gets hard to remember anyways. So you kind of want a way to keep this clean, keep it flowing. The way I like to think about it is like actual water in a stream or a creek. It's good when the water's flowing in terms of its drinkability. You never want to drink water or have water pooled up in a pond that you drink, because there's more likely to be scum or bacteria or disease in that water. It can get really toxic and ugly. But if the water's flowing, that's even if it's a small creek or if it's a rushing river, you kind of always know what the next thing that's going to happen is. So if they respond, then great, we get them here, we book the appointment, we close them, we make money. But even if they don't, there's still something else that's going to happen to them eventually that helps us stay organized and help keep our system super squeaky clean. So that's that. Now you know how to build a sales pipeline. You know how to add opportunities to that sales pipeline. You know how to move them around a couple of different ways, all of which super helpful and important for your sales organization and management. Once you have a good idea of how you are going to use opportunities in sales pipelines, you can go ahead and move on to the next module.
Copy, please.